There are two purposes for a memorial. The first is to remember the history, and the second is to apply that history to your life. Well, if you're joining us in reading through this month's reading plan, today's reading is Joshua 24, 19 through 28, and I encourage you to read that passage. Well, Israel is now in the Promised Land, and they've been fighting and removing the Canaanites for a number of years. Joshua is old and about to turn over the leadership of Israel to what would ultimately become a series of judges. But first he wants to make sure that Israel understands the significance of what has happened in their lives. Well, after making several statements about God and His holiness, he put a rock on the ground, and he calls it a memorial stone. Now, the purpose of the stone was to remind the people of what God had done and what they had promised. It wasn't a stone that was to be worshipped, it was a stone that was to be venerated. Well, what most Protestants have not heard of the term veneration. And the reason we tend to shy away from anything like that would be it reminds us of our Catholic background. The problem is that most of the time we throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are times in our Christian walk when we need to purposely make a memorial so that we remember what God has done for us, and times when we tend to forsake God because He seems so far away. Veneration means to hold in high regard. So when we venerate something, we're not worshiping it, but rather we're using it as a remembrance and applying that to history and our lives of that memory or of that particular object. This is not dissimilar to placing your hands on wet concrete or carving your initials into a tree. You want to remember something about that event, so you give yourself a reminder. So what do you venerate? Is it your car, house, job, money, or any of a myriad of things? The one thing that we are to venerate is our relationship with Christ. We need to set aside some things so that it is a reminder of what God has done in our lives and through Christ and for what we are to do, which is to follow Him and become more like Him. Today, I'd like you to place a stone somewhere, some kind of permanent object, all right, to remind you of what God has done in your life.